Okay, so this was intended to be the second video in the series of videos on the scientific method in economics. I guess technically the first one turned into two videos due to size limits on YouTube, so this may be the third, but regardless, this should be the follow-up to the general discussion of the scientific method in economics. And if you remember at the end of the last video, I promised you that we'd be discussing why we need both data and models to generate knowledge in economics using the scientific method, why we can't get by with just one or the other. So in this video, I would like to discuss why we need data at all, why we can't only rely on theories or models to generate knowledge. So as always, I would like to discuss why you need to know this, why you need to know that economists can't only rely on models to generate knowledge, useful knowledge about the world. And in your professional life, whatever institution you're a part of, so institution can be a company, it can be a government agency, it can be a school, it's that collective body. But your particular institution may differ from a model explanation. There may be something unique about where you work, which is not described by a model which you would otherwise take as telling you the truth. So it's important to balance what is proposed by models in theory with data which actually describes the world. And so we need to also understand this reliance on models is harmful, on only models is harmful, because economism is dangerous. And if that looks like a made-up word, it pretty much is, but we're going to dive into it later in this video. And to succeed in this class, you need to understand the limits and roles of the models that we have. We're going to be spending a lot of time and a lot of emphasis on particular models, but I also need you to make sure that you don't interpret those as being 100% true 100% of the time. They are insightful and they help grant us a new perspective, but they're not always applicable. And we'll dive into why, under what circumstances they're not applicable later in this video. So this may seem a little odd, but what I would like to do now is an in-class reading. So if this were a standard class, I would pass this article out, ask you to read it, and we'd do a think, pair, share. We don't really have the time for that in either of our synchronous classes for first or second week. And since we're not going to be able to do that in class, what I'd like to do now is read this article as part of the lecture and have you think about these questions while I'm reading and try to come up with the answers before I'm able to discuss them. And so these questions are in this paper that we're going to read by this article, which we're going to read by Noah Smith, who's an economist who now writes for Bloomberg. What is his main critique of Econ 101, the class which you're currently enrolled in? And what does that critique imply for both professors like myself and students like you? What is asked of us as we go through this process together? Okay, so Smith writes that Harvard's Greg Mankiw, author of the most popular college introductory economics textbook, is often regarded as America's econ teacher. He famously refers to his Principles of Economics as my favorite textbook. And I must admit that it's also my favorite. It's written in a clear, explanatory style and covers the basics of most important theories in modern economics. But Mankiw's book, like every introductory econ textbook I know, has a big problem. Most of what's in it is probably wrong. In the last 3 decades, the economics profession has undergone a profound shift. The rise of information technology and new statistical methods has dramatically increased the importance of data and empirics. This means that many professional economists are no longer, as empirical pioneer David Card put it, mathematical philosophers. Instead, they are more like scientists digging through mountains of evidence to find precious grains of truth. And what they have found has often been revolutionary. The simple theories we teach in Econ 101 classes work once in a while, but in many important cases, they fail. For example, Econ 101 theory tells us that minimum wage policy should have a harmful impact on employment. Basic supply and demand analysis says that in a free market, wages adjust so that everyone who wants a job has a job. Supply matches demand. Less productive workers earn less, but they are still employed. If you set a price floor, a lower limit on what employers are allowed to pay, then it will suddenly become uneconomical for companies to retain all the workers whose productivity is lower than the price floor. In other words, minimum wage hikes should quickly put a bunch of low-wage workers out of a job. That's theory. Reality, it turns out, is very different. In the last 2 decades, empirical economists have looked at a large number of minimum wage hikes and have concluded that in most cases, the immediate effect of employment is very small. It's only in the long run that minimum wages might start to make a big difference. That doesn't mean the theory is wrong, of course. It probably only describes a small piece of what is really going on in the labor market. In reality, employment probably depends on a lot more than just today's wage level. It depends on predictions of future wages, on long-standing employment relationships, and on a host of other things too complicated to fit into tidy little world of Econ 101. For academic economists, that's no problem. If existing theories explain only a sliver of reality, they simply roll up their sleeves and get to work. Many labor economists are now working on complex theories that model the process of employees looking for work and employers looking for people to hire. For professional theorists, empirical failures simply mean more work to do. But for Econ 101 classes, explaining only a small slice of reality isn't good enough. If economics majors leave their classes thinking that the theories they learned are mostly correct, they will make bad decisions in both business and politics. We shouldn't train tomorrow's business elite to have faith in theories that only have a small amount of empirical success. Another example is welfare. Econ 101 theory tells us that welfare gives people an incentive not to work. If you subsidize leisure, simple theory says you will get more of it. But recent empirical studies have shown that such effects are usually very small. Occasionally, welfare programs even make people work more. For example, a study in Uganda found that grants for poor people looking to improve their skills resulted in people working much more than before. This has big political implications. If we train tomorrow's business elites to think that welfare encourages laziness, they may block support for policies that really improve the lives of the poor and the economic productivity of the whole nation. But this is precisely what Econ 101 is now doing. So what's the solution? Complex theories sometimes do a better job of explaining reality than simple ones, but these theories are way beyond the mathematical skill of most undergrad econ majors. A better alternative is to start teaching empirics in 101. Current textbooks, including Mankew's, almost all play down the role of data and evidence. They sometimes refer to the results of empirical studies, but they don't give students an in-depth understanding of how those studies worked. Yet this wouldn't be very hard to do. The kind of empirical analysis now taking over the econ profession, often called the quasi-experimental approach, isn't that hard to understand. Simple examples could even be done in the classroom or as homework assignments. In other words, the economics profession has gotten real, and it's time for Econ 101 to do the same. We now have an economics profession focused on examining evidence in an Econ 101 curriculum that focuses on telling pleasant but often useless fables. Econ education needs to get with the times. So, returning to the questions that we had before the reading, it's my opinion that Smith's main critique of Econ 101 is that we should not be teaching what James Quack calls economism, the doctrine that the simple and basic starting block models of economics are always correct in every circumstance. So the real world is often much more complex than what our basic models suggest. Therefore, it's not that our simple models are necessarily themselves wrong. It's that we can't apply them to every single situation. To know which situations are appropriate to apply the models to, we need data to test the hypothesis. In terms of the second question here, so what does this critique imply for professors and for students? I think Smith warns professors to emphasize that the simple models do not apply in every situation, that there are much richer models which you can learn in later classes, and to include data and hypothesis testing when possible. So his advice is especially important that we shouldn't train tomorrow's business elites to have faith in theories that only have a small amount of empirical success. And empirical just means tested with data. And this is where the responsibility really falls on you. So we're going to cover basic models in this class because we do not have enough time to cover more sophisticated models. And understanding of these models would require so many more prerequisites in math. But more sophisticated models used to describe more complex reality do exist. You kind of have to take me at my word for that, or you can go out and look for them yourselves. And so I will do my best to try to introduce some sort of data when appropriate, but really I think we both just have to have a relationship here of trust with economism and Econ 101ism of applying these simple models to all of reality as just not being the right approach. So hopefully that makes sense. And with that in mind, I do want to talk about how this critique is applied to his two specific examples. So Smith's two examples were the minimum wage and welfare. And he pointed out that simple theory that we learn in Econ 101 about wages suggests that increasing the minimum wage should lead to more unemployment, should put people out of a job. We'll discuss that theory later in the class, but for now, it's important to note that empirically, this isn't always true, and some studies have even shown that increasing the minimum wage may lead to an increase in employment. And there's actually theories which would, that we will get into, which would support that as well. So once again, we can't rely only on theory because we had two theories, two models, which predicted two completely different outcomes. And we need data to actually test which of those is more accurate. On the other hand, he also considers welfare, and he posits that simple theory would suggest the existence of welfare subsidizes leisure, means that it makes leisure cheaper, and therefore discourages effort to find a job. And just like the work on the minimum wage, sometimes the empirical effect, what we find with data, with evidence, suggests that works the other way, that providing more generous welfare provides incentives for people to retrain and take the safety net to find new skills or new training or education for jobs they would like better, and they may work more. However, both of these examples illustrate the importance of ceteris paribus, and that just means all else equal. So hopefully you've read that in the readings in chapter 1, and it really is one of the single most important phrases in economics. Since models are just a simplification of reality, they need to have really strong assumptions about the rest of the world. A model really only works if we assume that nothing is changing, if all else is held equal. This point will be much more clear when we study supply and demand, but it applies to practically any model that we're going to learn in economics. So there are plenty of problems when we only rely on models and theory. If you take the simple models in this class as capital T truth, verbatim 100%, true all of the time, you will likely be misinformed about the best policy at some point in your life, whether that is understanding policy which is made by the government or the policy at a particular company. However, Noah Smith is not arguing that we should teach Econ 101 without any theory, only that when we rely on only data, we run into another set of problems as well. Specifically, the data may indicate that one choice causes a particular outcome, which is actually completely unrelated. This could lead us to bad policies. And in the next video, we will consider an example of how relying only on data may lead us to false conclusions.